sometimes say in the United States, non-Roma, I said that they steal your children. And the men laughed so hard, they could not contain themselves. I mean, the laughter just like shook the walls. They're like, we have so many children, why would we want more? Kids are expensive. Yeah.
Hi, this is Ingrid. You did a lot of research and talked to a lot of people. Thank you very much for that. But here's my question. In talking to so many people, is there, in your opinion, a chance that they can get some less prejudiced teachers for those children so that they will have a better chance to learn something?
I think it's starting to happen. It takes somebody like Mickey with a lot of energy and someone and a little bit in your face. When there's prejudice in the classroom, he goes and he confronts the teacher, the director, the person who's above the director, and he's reported to me he's actually seen teachers apologize, not just to the Roma student they offended, but also to the entire class. He told me this story. A teacher said, "Kids, I did something really awful. I called Peter a chigan. I thought it was a funny joke. I thought Peter would know I was joking, but it was offensive to him. And the worst thing, kids, is I demonstrated to you that it's okay to use this word and it's okay to tell jokes like that." So there is change. There are sensitive people, but it's change happens at the margins. It's one person at a time, one teacher at a time, one director at a time. But I do think that it is changing, but it takes, a willingness to be changed. Yeah.
Hi, this is Vernell. I'm done. Right here. Hi. In all of your travels and you growing up here in this area, do you see a correlation between what we experience in this country with our discriminations that are so blatant and what you see in Europe with the Roma?
Yeah, I really do. There is a strong correlation. I do see it. And unfortunately, it's what a dominant group does to, the subordinate groups. And until, I do see it. I do see it. Yeah, and I was asked about that. Hey, why are you coming here and asking us questions? You got your own problems. What's going on in the South? How are you treating people in Oregon? What about your migrant workers? I mean, these people are aware of some things going on in other places, so they would kind of turn the questions back to me, and it is very uncomfortable to say, yep, we have all the same problems. It might manifest slightly differently, but it's still there, definitely there.
Hi, Gina, I really appreciate this talk. My grandmother and father are from Serbia, and my grandmother, I remember, too bad I didn't ask her these questions before, but I never heard her discuss or ever talk about the Roma people. This is so new to me. I remember her being very closed about her past, and we couldn't really discuss her, her past at all, which was really unfortunate. But so I don't know, were they not discussed? I would say to her, I loved the gypsy music, and I loved the Serbian music and the Hungarian music, and I asked her one time if she would consider herself a gypsy, and she was really insulted by that.
Oh, yes. That doesn't surprise me.
I was enamored with the gypsies as a kid.
Yeah, and that was something I ran into a little bit too. The biggest insult, worst insult you could call anybody in Bulgaria, for example, is to confuse them with the Roma. And there were Bulgarian folks who looked very much like they could have been, dressing the same way, similar hairstyle. Really, they could have been, and it would have been highly insulting because Roma are clearly in the Bulgarian mind, the Serbian mind, Croatian mindset, they are a subspecies. We can't even consider them as being, people we would even acknowledge that they exist. As my friend in Latvia told me, they do not exist as such as people. And it's, it adds to that veil of invisibility. It's hard to see them if you're told they don't exist, hard to see them if they've learned that they don't have a voice, so they don't use it. Yeah, they sometimes have willingly played along with the invisibility. Yes.
Hi, this is Ken.
Oh, thank you.
Now that the Roma have more or less settled down, whether by force or not, and the nomadic lifestyle is probably not really practical in Europe, are they showing any signs of assimilation?
Interesting, not so much. And this is a very interesting, I think, kind of like an ethnological phenomena. How is it that they can be settled but not assimilated, and they have no distinct unifying language in the sense that a Roma person speaking Romani in Latvia may or may not be understood by a Roma person speaking Romani in Bulgaria. And they can have that very distinct culture. And you know, I was told many times, you know, by Roma groups, the Kalaji, for example, in central Bulgaria, we are the true Roma, best gypsies. Everybody else, they're fakes, you know. So each group contends that they're the best, they're the purest, and they don't unify. They have no political, economic, religious spheres where they unify.
Hi, this is Lester. Just as an aside, my mother came from Slovakia, and she always said she was part gypsy, and she had this little group of females who would come every month or maybe every week, and she would read tea leaves for them. And they all swore that she really could foretell the future. Now, I don't believe she was any part gypsy based on where she came from and so forth, but she thought that was a great thing to be.
Yeah.
But yes, one of the issues I saw was that they've transitioned. I saw this in Switzerland and other places. The caravans now are motorized caravans, and they either have RVs or trailers or so forth. I've never seen a group that were using horses, but in Switzerland, for example, they're only allowed to stay in one place for a specific period of time and then must move. So assimilation or integration is really not possible, nor could they go to the same school for any period of time. So I think there's a basic governmental as well as societal stigma of being Roma.
Yeah, absolutely would agree. But they're very flexible people, so maybe not using the horse and caravan, but they're caravanning in other ways. But yes, it's very difficult to get a quality education if you're always on the move because you're not allowed to stay. Yeah, it's as if their very existence is the thing that they're being punished for.
I am Hans. This goes back a little ways. I worked at Salem Hospital, then we worked nights there also at times. This is in the 60s. There was quite a group of people that just populated the second floor where the laboratory happened to be, and they were immovable. One of the patients, well, the nurses said, oh, he is some kind of a prince, and we just tried to work around them. That was 24 hours a day. He was there for several days, but everybody knew where they were.
This is very typical Roma behavior. When somebody goes to the hospital, the entire family, extended family, friends will go to the hospital too, because you never want to leave a sick person alone. And if it's a serious illness and they could possibly die, they shouldn't be left alone. So they're there to make sure that he is not contaminated by outsiders. A nurse, a doctor is a respected person to the Roma, but also they're a source of contagion and contamination. So, you know, the medicine itself could be a source of contamination. So they've got to make sure, and they're really probably watching carefully the food that this person was being fed. But their presence is important, that they come out in numbers like that, particularly in hospitals, just to make sure everything is okay and that their family members being well attended to, and also that everyone knows that they're there.
Thanks. Boy, it's pretty clear that there's tremendous interest in your presentation. So we'll take 10 and hope that there'll be time for questions another time. Thank you.
Are we good now? Okay. Well, so thank you for your questions and observations. I think I want to reserve some more time at the end because I think we have more. So I'll try to move more quickly through some of these things. But one of the areas where I saw some pattern, some similarity emerging between the different Roma groups that I was talking to were their attitudes toward work and some of the occupations that they would engage in. I have a kind of an old vintage photo on the second table back. It shows one kind of occupation that a particular group of Roma in Moldova and Romania are particularly well known, and I'll talk about that. But generally speaking, and this may be, again, a little bit of a cultural misinformation that I brought with me when I went on my first trips. I thought, well, all Roma, generally speaking, must have some skill with metalworking. Now, I did not know about Homer's account and had not read anything that Mircea Eliade had written, but I just somehow thought, oh, this is what they do. And while it was actually true in several places, that I would, in the Roma villages, and the Roma tended to live separately from their non-Roma neighbors, usually by about 5 to 10 kilometers away, they would group themselves. And I would see things like this. I would see very intricate work on rain flashings and on roofs and elaborate weather vanes, all kinds of bling, I guess, added to their fences and fence posts and even well covers. And it was clear that these folks at one time, were very good at the fashioning metal. It became clear to me that the Roma can do so much more. And as I traveled about in Romania, Serbia, and Bulgaria, I discovered as their demand in these kinds of skills was on the wane, they had to become very flexible and learn how to do other things. And so, namely, they had to become versatile in the art of collecting and redistributing, and we can define that very loosely. In Bucharest, on busy street corners, I would see Roma women hunkered over the curbs, slips of papers in their hand. Tax season was approaching, and they would sell these for those who wanted extra documentation. There is a heaven for those little slips of paper. Children would be going through trash bins looking for cardboard and metal. And outside on the city outskirts, I would see women and children by intersections selling hallets of berries. But by no means were these the only ways in which the Roma exhibited flexibility and a keen understanding of consumer trends. Recently, on the last trip in Jagodina, I met a man named Zika who was sitting in an outdoor market with his parents, phalanxes of cell phones and watches stretched out before him on a cardboard table. And he said, well, I find them broken and I fix them. Sure, the glass faces have cracks, but they all work. And he assured me that he told me, and there was no mistaking the pride in his voice. And he said on a good day, he can make 30 euros selling these phones that he says they really do work. And as I spoke with different Roma groups, I saw, too, that there's a pattern emerging between acceptable forms of employment or work and also a difference between men's work and women's work. So, for example, men's work, amongst the Kalaji, a very kind of isolated insular group living in central Bulgaria, I visited with, and this would have been a traditional trade that father would have passed down to son, the art of making huge copper pots. Kalaji in Romani means coppersmith. So they would have made these huge kind of copper pots for distilling spirits, but also smaller pots and pans. But it's a vanishing art, and he was Stefan there on the far left is the coppersmith, and he said, it's a fine art, and it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of skill and a lot of detailed work, and therefore it is vanishing. And he said, now everybody just wants to buy cheap crap from China. And his son's not pictured there, but I said, well, surely, Nasco, your son will because Nasco knows how to do this too. I said, surely he'll want to take over the family business. And he said, oh, why bother? Nasco's got his own business. He goes around the countryside collecting broken engine parts and carburetors and fixing them and then reselling them, to the same farmer who had that rotting tractor in their field. And I thought, yes, collecting and redistributing. And he's doing quite well at it. This is outside of Volkanesh, another example again of that kind of fine attention to detail with the metalworking of the fence, and a good example of women's work. So while the men are out there gathering, collecting, selling, trading, the women are in charge of the more quotidian, the domestic work inside the house. So they would be drawing water. In a lot of the villages, no running water, but there is a communal well. And so they would be the ones getting the water. They'd be the ones doing laundry. This is how you do laundry. They would be the ones in charge of obtaining the food, cleaning the food, cooking the food, serving it, and making sure all of the serving utensils were properly sanitized afterwards. Keeping utensils utterly clean and separated from anything else so that something that's tainted or unclean isn't touching it is of vital importance inside the house. For example, if she's doing laundry, you can be sure any kind of intimate garment is not mixed in with a non-intimate garment, and that's all part of upper body, lower body, keeping things separate and clean at all times. The wash water has to be disposed of in a particular way, particularly if it's wash water that was used in the cleaning of an intimate item. It cannot be, it just has to be disposed of in very particular ways. And when I was staying with the family, I had a young boy. It was just so shameful to send the young girl because of some of the things I was doing. They had to send the young boy to tell me that I was brushing my teeth incorrectly and the way that I was spitting what do you call that? your spittle. The way that I was doing that was wrong. And just all of the cleanliness rules, I realized it really does dominate the way people are thinking and how they interact in their world. And typically it's the females in the household who are in charge of making sure things stay pure. And purity was a topic that came up so often. I'm jumping backwards to work. So in Moldova, I met with a group of people who are called the Ursari, Ursa bear, and they would have been the bear leaders, bear trainers of the day. Now, they would have done this up until about 70 or 80 years ago. At that time, it became less popular to have traveling circuses, a lot harder to travel, again, because of some forced settlement policies under the communist era. In Romania, which was not a good place to be a Roma, by the way. But this particular group of people were very interesting to me because they were literate. They all could read in this one tiny village of about 80 people. Everybody, including the women, could read. And while everyone else around them was Orthodox Romanian, these folks were Baptists. And I found that just highly interesting. And I wondered how this occurred and if it had anything to do with their previous work, if in their travels they came across somebody who taught them to read Romanian. Now they are active in this particular village. Speaking of work, they are very active in transcribing New Testament passages in Romanian into their Romani dialect and doing it in a written form and also audio CD to share with others. And this is the only group that I found that seemed to be interested in the roots of their language and in actively codifying and preserving their own stories. So it's a group I plan to go and visit again because they seem to be pretty receptive to what I'm trying to do with storytelling. But I do find their history here quite interesting. And I think, please do note that the woman is smiling. She is happy to have that 200-pound bear sitting on her back. So I want to talk a little bit about purity, and I'll try to move quickly. I think because we've talked about upper body, lower body, and taboo and marime type things regarding taboo, the idea that purity is important was stressed from group to group. Whether I was in Latvia or Serbia or Bulgaria, it didn't matter where I went. The topic of purity came up. It was just assumed that I was impure because I was a gajo. And because I didn't know their rules, the assumption was I was very impure, and I would often be served with different utensils and on a different plate. Even though I was considered a guest of honor and they treated me with incredible generosity, it was assumed that I was a source of contagion. And so, little kids did not come up and hug me, and that was okay. But the idea that a person has to remain pure at all times, and the things that they have to do if they accidentally should become impure were quite exhaustive. To add to our complication, because talking about purity and impurity is itself a taboo, we had to walk very delicately around this, and again, often with several translators. At no time is purity more important when we're thinking about marrying off our youngsters. So with the college group, and there's about 18 to 20,000 of them living in central Bulgaria. And one day we were invited to a birthday party, and this is Anka in the red. She invited us to a birthday party, and she said, "Hey, come watch us sell a bride. Maybe we'll be famous in America." And so we get there to this informal bridal market, and the idea amongst the college is that they arrange marriages and they will sell their daughters for a bride price. And often sometimes this will come under scrutiny from non-Roma community in Bulgaria. And recently a documentary called Broadly focused on the bride market of Stara Zagora, which was about 10 kilometers of where we're at here. And in the documentary, the female interviewer met with several girls as they prepared for their big day. And the college families from all over central Bulgaria will come and were likely to attend. And this female interviewer asked these girls repeatedly what they thought about the idea of being sold off to another family. And the manner in which she asked the question suggested she had her own idea about how the girls might be feeling, and namely that they were repressed and they were being treated like objects and like chattel. Don't you want to pursue your own happiness, your own fate? Maybe continue your education at university? The interviewer asked her, and the answer the girls gave her surprised the interviewer. They said they have no desire to go to school, in fact, had found school boring. Happiness is what you make for yourself right where you are, one girl explained. Getting married and having children for her was the pursuit of happiness. Not one to give up easily, the female interviewer quizzed the girls further. Are they scared to marry or worried that their family has made a bad match? And the girls admitted to having some trepidation, but as they scrutinized their makeup and spritzed their hair and tried on dresses and shoes, and then more shoes, they seemed excited and even eager for the market. But don't you feel like an object? The interviewer asked, and the girls merely smiled and asked her, what do you do in your country when you want to find a husband? And the interviewer said, oh, well, we put on makeup and dresses and shoes and more shoes. And the girls said, well, it's like that for us too, only we don't drink and our parents go with us. So it's not so different, the girls were saying, and yet because of the strict rules regarding moral conduct, courtship for the Roma is different, very, very different. How can you marry a guy if you don't know that you'll work out? Physically, I mean, the interviewer asked. How can you marry him if you don't know what he's like in bed? And the interviewer said, I couldn't even think about marrying a man if I hadn't slept with him for a couple of months. And the comment, offered in such an offhand manner, was so clearly foreign to the girls, they had no idea how to respond. Their eyes widened, and for several seconds of dead air ensued. Do a lot of girls in the UK do this? one of them tentatively asked as if she was afraid of the answer. And it's like this amongst the college-y. Purity is carefully maintained and guarded. It is the single largest asset that the family has when they are arranging their marriages. And the young people are active and willing and happy participants in the process of preserving the purity, because they think in groups. It's all about what is good for the group, what makes my family look good, what makes the rest of my community look good. The idea of pursuing individual happiness, liberty, and freedom, that sounds good, and you'll see it on the American passport, all these phrases. It sounds wonderful, but it would not work in a communal society where everyone has to function as a whole group. So, what does a bride market look like? Well, I'll tell you, the boys stand like this, and they are looking the girls over. The thing is it's not like that documentary would suggest, in which there's no choice whatsoever. As one 13-year-old girl explained to me, we know each other. We go to all these birthday parties. We have time to figure out who we like and don't like, and we have ways of letting our parents know. It's not like they don't take into consideration, some of our feelings. But there are very strict rules of engagement. There's absolutely no sexual contact. The closest they could get is maybe to share a secret like this, and there's still some space between them, you can see. They only marry within their own group. That's very important. And again, the whole purity thing is absolutely important. Anka, the woman in the red shirt that I showed, when she was married, her husband's parents paid 15,000 euros for her, and this was back in 1980. That's a lot of money, and I asked her like a totally indelicate question. I said, well, why did they pay so much for you? And she said, because I was pure, and I'm a really hard worker, and besides, they didn't choose me, I chose him. And I said, I'm thinking, yeah, I bet you did. And I said, well, why is that? And she said, because he had blue eyes, and all the other girls wanted him, but I got him. Yeah, so I said, so it's not just about the money then? And she says, it's so funny. It's really not about the money at all. The money is just for show. It's an old tradition. People exchange this money, but it's really not what it's about. And in fact, if there's a young boy, here's one now. This is Jando. He's 17. I just thought he was such a doll. He gave me a lot of really valuable information. So say there's a young man and he's really got a fancy for somebody, but his family can't afford her. If the girl takes a fancy to him, the family of the girl may actually give to the boy's family the money, so then they can give it back. And it's all a face-saving gesture. So this is the girl Dando wants to marry. He said to me, I don't think I'm going to get her, though, because she's lighter skinned and a lot of boys want her, and my family isn't as rich. So my strategy is to be as charming as possible. I wished him all the good luck. He's pretty charming. I think it'll work out. Which was an interesting thing. We noticed a lot of girls at this birthday party dusting their skin with this white powder called pomada, and the idea is to make themselves look lighter. And though most of them did not have light-colored eyes, they would almost always be wearing green or blue eyeliner to suggest my eyes may be brown, but I still have blue. I almost have blue eyes, which is an interesting idea. And I asked some people about this. What is up with this pomada? And they said, we like lighter skin. We like lighter skin in case it's necessary for us to be even more invisible, and we need to pass. We need to be able to visibly be confused or mistaken for our Bulgarian or Serbian counterparts, colleagues. So, any event then is an opportunity to make matches, and any event then is heavily supervised. These are the bastions of purity. And they will get up, and if they think people are dancing too close together or just having too much fun, they'll make sure to put a stop to that right quick. So the idea is to marry the girls off at about 17 or 18 years of age in this particular culture. One man asked me, "How old were you when you got married?" And I said, 27. And there were 3 men present, and it got very quiet. And they said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Yeah. Never mind. Yeah, so this is a really typical Roma way of dressing, to have like a t-shirt of some sort, preferably something with a little bit of bling, and maybe a sweater. And then if they were standing up, their skirts would probably be a little bit longer than my skirt. If you're an older woman, it's longer. If you're my age, kind of middle-ish. And if you're young, you can have your kneecaps showing, but no more than the kneecap. Yeah. Do they wear pants? Only the younger women, and it's frowned upon amongst the Kalaji, but there were other Roma groups, the Horahane and Daskane, a lot of women wearing pants. It's fine. It really depends on different groups, group to group, what's acceptable. One little phrase I ran across a couple of times, and it went back to what do we value, what's important in our group, is this phrase, "You can't eat beauty with a spoon." Because I noticed there was a really beautiful girl, and it just didn't seem like she was getting the same attention as some of the other girls. And I was told, "You can't eat beauty with a spoon." Anka said that. I said, "Well, what does that mean?" And she said, "Beauty is important, but it doesn't put food on the table. We value a hard worker. We value an honest worker. We value a woman who is a creative problem solver, who would treat her husband and children well and look after them well. If she's beautiful on top of that, great. If not, really not the thing that we're looking for." So the practice of selling brides, or selling brides, was something amongst the Kalaji. They still do it, plan to keep doing it, regardless of documentaries that are made about them. For a lot of other people, the practice they remember is being stolen. So amongst the Daskane in central Bulgaria, typically what would happen is if a young man took a fancy to a young gal and let his parents know, he would enlist the aid of that girl's friends, or maybe even her family members, to lure her, usually to an outdoor movie or indoor movie, some kind of social event where there would be lots of supervision. And then typically, and I heard this like 5 different times, what they'd do is they would set her watch back by 3 or 4 hours, convince her that that was the actual time, go for a walk somewhere in their neighborhood of their own family, get her to come inside and have dinner with the parents, and then she would realize what the time really was, far too late to walk back home in the dark unaccompanied, so she'd have to spend the night. For a Roma, that means they are now married. If she spends the night under the roof of this young man's with his family, they're married whether or not they have any kind of physical contact. And so this happened in a number of instances. And then when that happens, then the father of the girl will then come and start the negotiations for the bride price. At that point, physical contact might occur, might not, but then they'll have the official wedding in which all the guests are invited, and it usually lasts between 3 and 5 days. In those days it did, and an intricate set of rituals regarding the preparation of the wedding and all of the food and people and gifts. That's very important, all the gifts, and documenting it. And if you have wealth, you want to show it. So a lot of the photos would have the bride surrounded by piles of pots and pans, not bridesmaids. It's all of her stuff, so that people could see, first of all, she was pure, because you only get the stuff if you're pure, and then what kind of family she's marrying into. This has no relevance to anything. It's just a great photo of this man having a good laugh at our expense. I think I said something poorly. It got translated even worse. Whoops. And then the woman in the background in the red shirt, she's just dying. And that's the best part of doing these kinds of travels and research, is when you have those little whoopsie mistakes and we can all just be human together. This is Radko. I told you a little bit about him, and he arranged for most of all the meetings that took place in Serbia and Bulgaria. And he's worth mentioning because he was able then to sort of bridge the gap between not just like anthropological data and figures, which he had access to, but also to this whole legendary and lore and mythology that is known by the Roma, but not written down. So it's not known to most people who are non-Roma unless we know the Romani language and are there and hearing it spoken. So what are those stories? Well, I will tell you. A lot of the stories that are told have to do with the ritual of surrounding death and dying and how best to make sure dead people stay dead. And just about everybody I talked to had a story about this is what happens if you do not bury somebody correctly or you do the funerary processes incorrectly. These are the kinds of hauntings you can expect, and this is the kind of bad luck curses that can happen to you. The tradition around death and dying is remarkably similar amongst a lot of these different Roma groups. So typically, well, any kind of a social occasion is an event in and of itself, but death and dying is probably right up there with a wedding in terms of as a reason to gather and a reason also to work out a lot of things within the family. So in Latvia, when a man is going to a funeral, he is supposed to bring 20 bottles of wine or beer, and it's not for the mourners, I was told, it's for the dead one, and it'll go inside the casket. I was assured multiple times that every gypsy goes to heaven. And I was also told, and this is in Latvia, that if there's a pastor at a funeral, after the funeral's done, there will probably be 3 or 4 weddings before the evening is out. Again, it's a social event. It's an occasion to get a lot of business done. So people actually really look forward to the death, not of their loved ones, but of other people's loved ones. So often when a person is placed into the grave, pieces of broken mirrors are put in coffins as well as cigarettes, and there's this idea that the dead have needs and material objects will make them more comfortable in the afterlife. One woman in Bulgaria told me about a funeral she attended in which they had kind of like on a cart, they had a TV and a radio blaring the whole way to, they had the casket, and then behind the casket's this TV with this person's favorite soap opera going, and also like the radio was going. And then when they buried the person, they had the TV and the radio still going into the grave, into the plot, into the ground itself. And she was told, well, other people might enjoy listening to the soap opera too. So for the Daskane, and Radko was one, he says it's really important that the deceased, and this kind of goes back to that comment about the hospital, the deceased or someone who is about to die is not left alone. And for the first night, the family gathers around, and then the next day, very often a band will accompany the body and the casket to the graveyard. Sometimes in central Bulgaria, they will chop wood to make a cross, and the cross is believed to keep the dead person settled, so they won't come back after the funeral. In Serbia, they will take brooms and turn them upside down. Then the burnt wood, they'll burn wood in a stove and put the ashes by the door. And then as people come back from the graveyard, they're supposed to wash or kind of dip their hands and feet in the bucket of ash. And that's another preventative. And then they'll put a bowl of flour on the table. And then they'll put a big glass of water. And they'll watch it carefully. When they get up the next morning, if they see a handprint in the bowl of flour or they see that the level of water has gone down at all, it means that the dead person is hungry and thirsty, and they will waste no time getting back out to the graveyard and putting food and water back into the casket or around the casket. So all this is really, really, really important because the dead have to be kept happy. If they're not happy, they'll come back and haunt. One woman told me a story in which a family member, she had a sister living in Germany. She was living in Serbia. They had a family member die. It was an untimely and painful death, and this is a family member that not very many people liked very much, sadly. And so the preparations were done hastily, and perhaps not as much care and thought went into it as maybe the sisters say maybe it should have. So after that person is buried, the sister in Germany, she's noticing that she's having horrible dreams every night, as are her children. She feels she's being haunted and that somebody's put a curse on her. So she decides to go visit her sister in Serbia just to get away from all of this bad luck. The first night she's there, she crawls into bed next to her sister. And this is kind of their family tradition, is that the women can all climb into bed together. And then at some point in the middle of the night, they notice a third body climbs into bed next to them. And that woman telling me the story, she said she woke up and she looked, and there was a hand grabbing her arm. And she looked to see, she thought it was her sister, and it was the dead relative had followed. So there are like 100 of these stories, and of course they're true. And the point being, and always the moral to the story was, you must take care of your dying, and you must bury them well, which means for a Roma funeral, excess and lavish abundance is the rule. You want to not only show everyone the wealth that you have, because generosity breeds good luck, but you also want to show the dead the greatest amount of honor possible, because you don't want them to come back and haunt you. So there are so many little rituals regarding how to prevent a haunting to go into the list. It could become tedious, but it was interesting to me to see there is this fluid, kind of seamless line between the living and the dead, and they could speak about the dead in that sense that that the two worlds really cross over very fluidly. Yes, this is a gravesite in Volkanest. Grieving properly is as important for the dead that has passed away as it is for the family. So whereas in the United States, maybe we put our flowers and our floral sprays there and then kind of leave it, they'll continually renew, and they will spend a lot of time and care on the upkeep of that plot. Some families will go into debt, buying markers, gravestones, little benches to sit on. It's like a family shrine, and so it's a matter of pride and family reputation to keep it looking as well as possible. So if the world of the living and dead is seamless and fluid, there are other parts of Roma existence which are absolutely not fluid and seamless. One is this idea of clean and unclean, and the idea of marime, or what is taboo. And I think I already mentioned the human body is itself the source of all kinds of contagion and uncleanliness. The female body in particular is especially polluted, and that is the reason why in some Roma groups in a social occasion, men will sit on one side of the room, women on the other side. Children are exempt from this rule up until the time of about puberty. They're considered naturally clean and innocent, so the same rules don't apply to them. And the elderly are considered, because of their age, their status is elevated as wise ones, and so the same rules don't apply. But people from about the age of 13 to something like 70, 75, still follow, have to religiously, very carefully follow all kinds of cleanliness, ritual washing rules, and guard very carefully social interactions so as not to bring shame upon themselves or their family. Women, for example, who pass too closely to a man, should an article of their clothing, the worst thing that could happen is if her skirt were to touch his trousers, she could be beaten. She has shamed him, and then there's a certain kind of ritual that has to happen to unshame her and unshame him. But he's been polluted. Those trousers, they have to be burned. There's no bleach. There's no water wet enough, soap strong enough to clean it. And there are just like millions of rules regarding all of these kinds of clothing and utensils and food. But there's nothing more polluting than contact with outsiders, which you can imagine made my job really interesting, knowing that I'm just the source of all contagion and morally suspect on every level. It was interesting, but the contact with the outsider is the most polluting agent, and so for many folks, eating in a restaurant that is owned and operated by an outsider is just unthinkable. So a few of you mentioned to me you know of stories or have seen that there have been Roma who've been hired as entertainers to work in a restaurant or something like that. That would be the one exception if they are, it's part of their employment. They're sort of given a pass. They can't help it. They have to be in the presence of outsiders. But outsiders, and particularly their food and the way that the outsiders eat their food is suspicious to them and a source of defilement. So it's, if they have to go to a fast food restaurant, for example, now we're talking about Roma, say in the Pacific Northwest, they will not take a plastic fork or spoon from a communal bin of plastic forks and spoons that maybe you see sometimes, but they will use one if it's individually wrapped in plastic, because that is clean. Anything else that other people have touched, unclean. They're absolutely appalled by the way some people, outsiders, do their laundry, and they mix and match intimate items with non-intimate items. They're appalled that somebody might use a washcloth in the shower on a lower part of their body and might possibly then use it on their hands. That's just not done. It's so unclean. So I was just fascinated by how deeply, thoroughly this idea of cleanliness and purity pervades most parts of their everyday existence, and how, I have to say, it doesn't mine. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Yeah, no wonder they think somebody like me is wildly, extravagantly unclean. They would be appalled. I have an animal. I let my animal come inside my house. They would never do that. Dogs and cats are horrifically unclean. I just think, wow, yeah, there really is a whole lot here. So I'm going to stop and try to leave some time for questions, if there are any.
Hi, I'm Tony. So enjoyable and interesting. My question is about funerals and care of the dead. Are men and women treated the same?
If they've died and they're being prepared?
In terms of being prepared, in terms of the funeral itself, of the extravagance, people coming.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Generally speaking, yes. An older person is shown more reverence. The bigger your body size, your corpulence, that indicates how important you were in the community. So if you're older, if you're fatter, if you're wealthier, if you had more children, these up your level of prestige. And so then the funeral it gets crazy big, crazy extravagant, and the amount of food and the amount of drama, is going to go up. Yes. In general, yes, they are treated the same.
Hi, my name is Louise. Here, over here.
You're going to have to. Oh, okay.
Is there Is there such a thing as the title King of the Gypsies, or is that just another one of those myths?
Yeah.
I also, like Hans, worked in a hospital back in the Midwest when supposedly the king of the gypsies was a patient, and the entire tribe camped out on the lawn in front as long as he was in the hospital. So is that a real title?
No, and it's really a fabrication for our benefit because it sounds good, and it also sort of lends an extra air of mystery. And what better way to ensure that he'll get the proper medical treatment if we call him a king? And also, 200 people are camping out. Yeah.
Hi, this is Mika.
Okay, hi, Mika.
Given the cleanliness that they're interested in and the divide between Roma and outsiders, do they tend to be very healthy, little disease, that kind of thing?
You would think that these people would live until they were 110, given their fastidiousness concerning hygiene and cleanliness, but I found that really wasn't the case. And in Serbia, amongst the Arlia and Tamari groups in particular, lots of troubles with kidneys for some reason, and my host was like, I'm absolutely perplexed by this, but our people die at like 58 and 60 of kidney failure. So I think that nutrition has a role to play with that, because most of the folks I spoke to weren't heavy smokers and they weren't drinkers. But I think that I don't know exactly why, but many of them do not live long.
Yes, this is Nisha, and I'm here.
Oh, hi.
Yes. I also worked at Salem Hospital in the critical care unit, and when we had Queen of the Gypsies as severely ill, and everyone camped out in the waiting room, but we were told that the reason so many had to be in the room was that the last person to touch the Queen after, or as she was dying, or while she was still alive but dying, would become the queen of the group. Now, have you heard of this?
This is a new one for me, but it is, again, common for large groups to camp out. I had a friend whose mother was an embalmer for 60 years in North New Jersey, and the group that they tended to service most were the Romashals. And so camping out and the passing on of like a title or a power was very important. And then you can imagine the sibling rivalry that would occur. So they ran a funeral home, and they learned very quickly that when the Romashals were going to have a funeral at their funeral home, they were going to use plastic plates and cups because of the fallout that would ensue. But they would have the Romashals anyways, would have their deceased prepared by an outsider, because to touch a dead body would be highly, a source of contagion, and would be highly polluting. It would be morime. So they would hire others, not another Roma, but gaje, to prepare bodies. And they would shut the windows, nail them, ask to have the windows nailed shut so that the mulo, the spirit, wouldn't get confused. It's very important to light candles so that the mulo could find the correct way to heaven. So a lot of ritual regarding and tradition regarding death and funeral practices that vary between the Romashals in Northeast United States and, say, the Machvayu and the Kalderash that live in Portland and Seattle and Spokane. They're following some different things there.
My name is Carmen. I had an experience, my first experience with a gypsy family in Fremont, California, when we were first married, and it was a tract area, our first home. They didn't come out of the house, and they stayed very close to their home, but when they finally had to go to school, they saw that myself and my neighbor across the street, who was Jewish, were probably okay to communicate with. And she told us that she was in a concentration camp. She's from Spain, and she was sent to a concentration camp because she was, she said gypsy, half gypsy and half Jewish. And I asked her how she survived because she had 4 children and a nice family. And she said that when they're teenagers, the Nazis used them for prostitution. So she was able to escape. And she became very friendly with us later and was thankful to have someone she could talk to.
Hello, I'm Roger, and my wife asked the question. You talk primarily about other people accepting them, but at the same time you're saying that they don't accept the primary population. It's hard to see how they can be assimilated in any way under these circumstances. And I have a related point, kind of from the Greek ideal of comparing a city to an individual. I'll compare the individual to a group of individuals and say that when a individual does things that gets him beat about the head and face on a regular basis, he changes his behavior, and except for those who somehow just can't do it. And the Roma are not the only group who seem to have this same problem on a group's lifespan of thousands of years. They get beat about the head and face. They don't change their behavior. Have you any comment on either point, the possibility that they will change their behavior? What can be done about it? Anything like that?
Well, as far as changing behavior, I don't think that would happen in terms of Roma have no desire to fully assimilate, because why would you want to become dirty and polluted? So they like their identity, they want to remain separate, but they would like it to be a harmonious non-assimilation. So they would like to be able to have economic relationships that do not get them beat about the head and face. But the idea that they would engage in all the same trades and that they would live precisely as the outsider communities around them live, I think they would find utterly abhorrent. And so the worst thing a Roma could do is marry a non-Roma and have children. For example, that's highly polluting to the entire clan and tribe. So I don't know that behaviors would change. I'm not sure how to define behaviors, but I think certain attitudes about assimilation, I think, will not change. But I do think they are more and more open to the idea that education would further their cause, that they could do better in this life, their children could do better, if they could encourage their children to stay into school a little bit longer and then marry and have children. And I was seeing amongst the Ursari who had some exposure with some education that was a value. Among some of the college, they were encouraging their girls to go as far as high school. Instead of marrying at 13 and 14 to marry at 18. They were seeing that having some education would help them, and in particular learning English and some computer skills would help them. So those kinds of behaviors, I think, maybe might constitute, changes in those kinds of behaviors might constitute an overall change, but I don't think there is a huge desire to become like the other, to be just like their Bulgarian counterparts, for example.
Hi, this is Wes. I was sparked by information about poetry and music, and I thought you might give us a little more information about that.
Yeah, so on the last 2 trips, I really was earnestly trying to gather poems and, in particular, folk tales. And so I did find an older man who could tell some lost tales that none of the other researchers I had been reading had collected in their compilations of what they were calling gypsy tales. So that was pretty fruitful. But I noticed they were really long stories. But a lot of them had to do with the importance of being clever and outsmarting your enemy, and whether your enemy is a jealous brother or whether your enemy is an outsider. And the value of, again, purity, marrying the right person, and how a person would determine someone is pure. And there's usually a test, like there's 3 giants that have to be slain, or 3 impossible tests that nobody could possibly do without the aid of some kind of underworld god or goddess or nature. So there were similarities to some of the folk tales from other countries I had come across, and then little flares that made them distinct and peculiar, I think, to that particular Roma tribe. When I would ask people about poetry or music, sometimes they would say, well, that's a cliche. Just because I'm gypsy, you think I know how to play a violin? You know, like, see, there I go again, I did it. So I didn't come away with as much as I had hoped on these last 2 trips, but I did come across a few people who knew some really old tales, and then the interpreter would turn to me and say, I've never heard that one before. I'm glad. I hope you write that one down. You know, he was really surprised, and this was his grandfather telling the tale. So I never heard him say that one. So sometimes the lesson to me is sometimes you just have to ask the questions, and then people are just amazing. They'll answer.
Here, this is Irene, and I just can't help but thinking the power of culture and how it really is such a big thing to people everywhere in the world. But my question is, if this culture is so into marrying within the group, are there genetic issues, and are there that sort of thing? How do they deal with their handicap members and that whole question?
Well, it's considered an impure act to marry too closely within the clan, so like first cousins, and it's even frowned upon for second cousins. So a great deal of time and energy is put into finding someone who isn't too closely related. So I think that they're aware that that could cause problems. In terms of handicap, and I don't know if this is like a Roma attitude toward handicap, or if it's Central European, South Central European attitude, but in general, if someone has a handicapped child, that child is secluded, but not always. What I found was, by and large, family really comes around each other and helps each other out, whatever the issue might be with someone who has some kind of ailment or difficulty, or they're born with something. They really come around each other. Bulgarians and Romanians tend to warehouse their handicapped children and put them in institutions and visit them twice a year. And I visited many such institutions, and I was told time and time again, we Roma, we would never do that to our children. And then they asked me, well, what do you do with your elderly in the United States? I said, do you put them in warehouses? I said, well, we call it upscale gracious living. And they said, we would never do that to our elderly. And besides, it might piss them off and they'll come back and haunt us forever.
Gina, you have taken us to a world that most of us knew absolutely nothing about, and I admire your ability. Oh, okay. Thank you. Are you still taking the group to Germany?
Yes, so I have other trips planned, and hope to go back to all of these countries and more. Yes, thank you. You all have been so generous and gracious. Thank you so much.
Can lead you that way. It's time for Local Roots. Let's welcome today's guest, Redbird.
I set out to seize the day, tripped on karma, turned to gray. Can't seem to keep this happy place, and I'm a hard as stone. Turn on the screen and I'm lower still. Battle with myself and it's all uphill. Never get back this moment that is lost on the wind. And I need something real, 'cause I want what you got, and I'm tired of fooling around with.
As we dedicate this memorial, we do so with the hope this will be a place of contemplation, peace, and healing. The Vietnam War is the war of my generation. For all of the veterans here today, I wish to say, no matter how you served, no matter when you served, and no matter where you served, I owe you a debt of gratitude. I'm Steve Bates, and I'm the president of the Vietnam War Memorial Fund. Today, we dedicated Phase 1 of the Vietnam War Memorial on the Oregon State Capitol grounds. It was actually a dream of a Vietnam veteran back in 2015 when it was iterated to me. In 2017, we actually started working on that dream, and we met with some legislators and actually formed the nonprofit organization.
These are our state park lands. This is a sacred place. The sacredness of civic engagement that you see in the halls of the Capitol, to have this memorial here on these grounds, I think means so much to Oregonians. And I'm proud to be governor today to be here for this dedication.
The Vietnam War Memorial is a symbol of healing, an honor of the fallen, and a call to remember. Vietnamese Americans have worked hard to earn a living and contribute their efforts in the new land that we consider our second homeland.
In the city of Salem, there are memorials to every war fought from the Civil War. And at the basement of the Capitol, there was a memorial to the Civil War. There's a memorial to every other war except for the Vietnam War. And with that oversight and the way that the Vietnam veterans were treated when they came home, that was sort of another slap in the face.
It's hard to believe it's been more than 60 years since the United States became involved in direct military conflict in Vietnam. For nearly 10 years before that time, American military advisors were in country as well, assisting the South Vietnamese military. More than 58,000 American servicemen lost their lives, most from combat actions, while more than 300,000 were wounded in action. Between 1955 and the mid-70s, 2.7 million Americans served in Vietnam. Nearly 800 Oregonians lost their lives.
When I think about this dedication, I think about my stepfather, Corporal Donald Perky, who was 17 when he went to Vietnam. He earned 2 Bronze Stars and was a rifle sharpshooter. He might have returned home physically. He was lucky in that way, but he was a changed man and he was never the same mentally. He is buried along with other comrades at Willamette National Cemetery. And this also reminds me of a quote: not everyone who lost their life in Vietnam died there, and not everyone who came home from Vietnam ever left there. So today we say, welcome home, and the VFW will never forget those that served in Vietnam.
When we're done here, I want you to walk over to this column, any one of these columns, and pick a name at random. I want you to walk up and touch the granite, the smoothness of the granite, and to run your fingers across the letters that are incised into that granite. You need to accept the spirit of this man who died for our country into your heart so that he is never forgotten, so he can live on in each and every one of us.
The design of this memorial was to be like no other. The steering committee chose to combine art, nature, and tradition. There is art in the design and the sculpture. The trees and plantings are the nature, and the names engraved in granite stone is the tradition. Our motto has always been, let us honor our warriors and remember the fallen. The series of granite columns looks like a solid wall from a distance, but up close is a wall with spaces, holes if you will, representing our society during the Vietnam War, divided and fractured. This is unlike the solid walls that you see over on the World War II Memorial to the north, which has a solid wall representing the solid support our nation had for our soldiers fighting in Europe and the Pacific. The names on these columns are individuals who lived and died for our country. They are not just names on granite. These 790 names represent a person, a story, and a family. These names represent those who were a son, a dad, a brother, an uncle, a nephew. They left Oregon and their moms and dads, sisters, brothers, wives, sons, and daughters to serve. Their family gave them their name, and that name is foremost because family is the tie that binds. Their rank is secondary. That's why when you look at their name is first and their rank follows. This is to honor the Gold Star families who gave them those names.
I'm Libby Ruth. I'm the sculptor for this monument, so I designed and sculpted it in synthetic casted bronze. I was asked to depict the returning soldier. So I wanted to show a man who had come home and who's really struggling with everything he experienced over there, and who's maybe not even able to talk about it, and he's feeling really isolated and alienated and struggling with PTSD and who knows what. And it's kind of the point that we don't know what. You can see that he's suffering, but we don't really know what he went through. So I wanted to capture kind of a relatable person. And it's hard to ignore that he's struggling. And I used the wall to kind of block him from the backside, so when you walk up to him, you don't really know what to expect, and you can't really see his face. And that's where you walk all the way around and stand immediately in front of him, almost as if you're looking into a mirror. So it kind of forces a really direct interaction, which is what these guys didn't experience. People will just walk past them and still do, without really acknowledging that they're struggling with something, that they're going through something, and that we don't know what it is, and they don't really owe us their story. We should acknowledge and respect them just because they had an experience.
By memorializing the fallen, we honor all who served. The welcome home columns and the sculpture entitled A Soldier's Return speak to the lack of respect the returning Vietnam veterans received. To our Vietnam veterans, welcome home. To the state of Oregon, as the president of the Vietnam War Memorial Fund, I present to you the Oregon Vietnam Veterans Memorial on the Oregon State Capitol grounds.
I think this is going to do a lot for not only the state of Oregon, but the city of Salem. It's long in coming and well deserved. I have an issue with the fact that we had 3 million Americans serve in Vietnam. Almost 1 million of them are dead now. And so they weren't around to share in the accolades.
So from lessons learned, President Ronald Reagan even said, even at this late date, we can all agree we have learned one valuable lesson. That young Americans must never again be sent to fight and die unless we are all prepared to let them win. So let this memorial be for the healing of the mind and spirit, for those that returned, for those that wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, and for those battle buddies that came home and asked, why me? And for those that just can't shake the demons of war, and for those children and grandchildren in the future who can come and reflect on their heroism of their relatives. So for our brothers and sisters who did not return home, fair winds and following seas. Thank you. Semper Fi.
Airport.
Like on the floor in front of my mom and in front of my little sister. You don't even know what is in the drugs that you're about to consume. I mean, this part of it had fentanyl in it. That's the scary reality now. I just woke up 3 days later in the hospital by the grace of God. We didn't start this problem, but we can be part of the solution.
Welcome to 2025 and the Salem City Club. I wish you, my whole family, wishes you peace, love, understanding, and forgiveness in the new year. The Salem City Club has, I'm going to read right from the bylaws here, a common meeting ground for persons of divergent beliefs, politics, and occupations for the interchange of ideas and the stimulation of informed thinking and action on civic affairs. By providing this, we can support understanding, which I think is a simple word to encompass our entire goal, and hopefully create a better path for peace, love, and forgiveness here in Salem, which after all is the city of peace. To promote understanding of our own state legislature, today we open 2025 with a legislative review. And Jan Margosian, past president and long-term volunteer, will introduce our speakers today.
Oh, that irritates me. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, very good. I'm so excited about today. It's just very good. I love it when the legislature goes into session, and I love everything they do, and I love knowing about it. And I know this whole group loves it too. So I knew there'd be a large crowd when we announced that there was going to be a preview on what's happening in the session, what they think is going to happen. And if I've learned anything after living in Oregon's capital city over 60 years, is that Salemites like to talk about two things: One, the weather, and two, politics. So I was pretty sure we would fill the room, and we did, because I invited caucus leaders from the Senate Democrats and the House Republicans, and I think that will be very nice balance. I asked them to preview what they believe are the most pressing issues that will drive the legislative agenda when the session opens January 21st. Now, our speakers today are Senate Majority Leader Case Jama. He's a Democrat, Senate District 24, and House Minority Leader Christine Drayson, Republican, House District 51. Now, I just want to remind everyone, because someone asked me this the other day, wait a minute, don't we just meet every other year? No. Okay, we meet annually. The odd years, the sessions may last 160 days. We refer to that as the long session. During the long session, the legislature approves a 2-year state budget for the next biennium. That's a big thing. In even years, we have the short session, and that's a maximum of 35 days. And you know they work really hard to get just about everything in there you can imagine. Now, both speakers are very well known, and they have extensive bios, and I'm not going to go into those. You can just go into Oregon State Legislature.gov, and you can read them. And because both of them have a lot of honors and a lot of stuff. But I am going to list just a couple of things to give you a small taste of what they're about, okay? Senator Jama, he was elected Senate Majority Leader in 2024. He's the first former refugee, Black Muslim, and Somali American to serve in the Oregon State Senate. He received a bachelor's degree in sociology at Marylhurst and was previously a nonprofit executive director. Now, Representative Drayson first joined the Oregon legislature in 2019, where she became the House Republican leader. And then she ran for governor, and then she returned to the legislature, where her colleagues embraced her and said, okay, we're electing you the House Republican leader. And there she is. She has a BA from George Fox University. Now, we did have a tradition that we just tossed a coin to see who went first, but they decided they didn't want to toss a coin. So Senator Jama is going to go first. Each speaker will have a 15-minute preview, and then we'll follow it by a question and answer session until 12:55, and that's when our president, Nikas, is going to close the program. And so I give you Senator Jama. I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Jan, for inviting that introduction. First of all, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having us, and I want to appreciate and thank the City Club of Salem for inviting us for this event. Looks like a well-attended and full crowd here. I really appreciate it. And in terms of the two issues that you most like to hear most, I would like to report that the weather is wet and rainy. Before I go to the politics. So again, my name is Senator Casey Jama. I serve District 24, which is outer East Portland and North Clackamas County. That includes Boarding and Damascus. I think for me, let's just keep going. The reality is that, let me say this first. Oregon is facing a lot of challenges. That includes cost of living increases, inflation, as well as affordable housing crisis. People are struggling a lot. And we have to make sure that we as a community, whether you are Democrat or Republican, and in between, come together to address some of those challenges. In the Senate, since I came to the Senate 2021, we have been working hard, and I will say across the aisle and bipartisan manner in a ways that puts Oregon forward. So we really committed to making sure that we serve Oregonians. Oregonians are expecting us as a community, leaders who are committed, working together and working, making sure that we address some of the pressing challenges that they are facing. With that note, in the upcoming 2020 session, I have to say that it is really challenging session, and we have to make sure that we come together as collective body to ensure that we address some of those challenges. And as a Democrats caucus members, my goal is to work with my Democratic caucus leadership and leaders across the board to ensure that we have a robust agenda that really responds to the needs that Oregonians ask us to address. We usually do around town halls meetings. We talk to chairs of the committees. We discuss among ourselves. We understand those challenges that the community are facing. So this agenda that I'm going to give you a quick preview today, it's actually well-developed agenda that really includes ideas that come from a variety of different opinions. So with that said, the focus of our agenda this coming session is that, number one, increasing prosperity in Oregon. Goal two, making Oregon safer and healthier for all Oregonians. Number three, protecting the rights of freedoms of all Oregonians, regardless of their background. In terms of my position as a majority leader, as I said earlier, my goal is to really increase the participation of my colleagues to work together and making sure that our agenda is focused around the issues that Oregonians are facing. In terms of the increasing prosperity for all Oregonians, there is no doubt in my mind that all issues are interconnected and intersectional. In terms of, for example, housing, we have expended for a lot of resources for the last 4 years since I came to the Senate, approximately about $4.2 billion of investment, both long-term and both short-term solutions that we addressed. So those housing, but at the meantime, we know that the housing issue is not becoming easier for a lot of Oregonians. This housing crisis has been developing for decades. It started the last recession that we had. So we're underdeveloped in many ways and underbuilt in many ways in these housing issues. So the goal is really to invest in long-term strategies, making sure that Oregonians have accessible, affordable housing. Number two, how do we make sure that Oregonians stay in their homes so we don't add more people going to the streets and adding to more becoming homeless? With that particular issue, our goal is to make sure that there is rental assistance programs available to all Oregonians who are struggling. We want to make sure that we increase housing production. That's really key. Last session, Senator Anderson, my colleague, and I worked together as a housing committee chair and co-chair to ensure that we pass a package that really responds to the infrastructure needs of our housing crisis. If you are building in the rural area, I traveled a couple of years ago in the rural area, and I talked to some of the county commissioners, and one of the things that they said to me is that we do have a land we can build, but the challenge is that we don't have infrastructure that we can whether it's sewer pipes, whether it's water, whether it's electricity, whether it's roads that can take people from A to B. So with that said, we invested those housing issues in a ways that helps all Oregonians across the board, regardless of where they are in the state, helping the projects that invest this infrastructure priorities that the Oregonians identified for us. In terms of the other issues that relate to prosperity for Oregon, building prosperity, we want to do better public transportation. As you know that last year, committee chairs and committee members of the Transportation Committee in Senate went through across the state and did a lot of listening sessions with the community, asking, what do you think that the challenges are in our transportation? And number two, how do we address it, those challenges that we're facing as a state? And those information has been collected, and now there is a two subcommittee, I believe, that is really putting together a report that hopefully they will share with the members and the public. And we want to make sure that acknowledge that process, because as someone who really comes from public engagement, nonprofit, that we want to make sure that the process is let's give time the process to work out, and making sure that we report, get the report, and then let the session work through itself, and hopefully we'll land a good place where we can address some of those transportation issues. The other issues that Democrats are going to address this coming session is that making Oregon safer and healthier. We must address crime, enhance public safety, and improve law enforcement practices. Investing, improve community health, address on root causes of crime. That's really a key element of it. Like, we cannot arrest our way out in terms of the crisis that we're facing. We really have to make sure that we help and address some of the root causes that includes the economic disparities in our state. So that's one of the ways that we're hoping to address. Healthier, I think making sure that we address drug addiction, and we spend a lot of resources on that issue, but we need to continuously do that, continuously invest that, making sure that since we passed House Bill 4002 last session, we need to continue the investment that we make so we can see improvement on that issue. So expanding access to treatment and mental health care will be really key priority for this coming session. Last thing that I want to mention is that before I step from the podium is that protecting the rights of the freedoms of Oregonians is important to us. We understand that we have new administration in Washington, D.C. It's going to be challenging. If anything that tells us in 2016 is that this is going to be chaotic and challenging administration. Our goal is really to ensure that the Oregonians' rights and freedoms are protected. That's really what I am for it. I came to this country as a former refugee. I do believe take very seriously about how do we make sure that Oregonians' rights are protected regardless of their background, where they come from, and who they love. So safeguarding reproductive rights will be really important to this coming session. Protecting immigrant refugee rights, LGBTQ plus rights will be important. And again, the message is that the legislators must continue respecting personal liberties, ensuring everyone's rights are upheld. In terms of the other issues that we want to make sure that I highlight before my time is up, is that clearly our colleagues, both aisles of the side, has been working together. And a good example is that the last special session that we deal with the wildfire crisis, and we were able to swiftly move resources to the agencies and the contractors who are desperately fighting and making Oregon safer, and by fighting wildfire. So I do believe that partnership and collaboration is a key element. That's how I operate. Opening dialogue, sitting close to the table, inviting people who have a different opinion than you, and ultimately, even if we disagree, we can shake hands and have a lunch together. I do believe that in my heart, and that has been my goal as a senator, to ensure that we work together. And we work together, as I said earlier. That's really important that I mention that, despite of what you see in the media, a lot of times we collaborate. Even if we sometimes disagree about a particular bill, we just move on next level and say, okay, what's the next bill for us that we're going to talk about? So really, collaboration is there, but we need to continuously enhance. The last thing that I'm going to say before I leave here is that I think we need to be a little bit kinder to each other as a society, as a community. We lost that. As someone who came to this country 25 years ago, it breaks my heart when I see when public discourse becomes so intense and so challenging. I think we need to put the temperature down. We need to show some compassion and caring with one another, and to ensure that we respect each other, different opinion, but ensuring that we care Oregonians the most. And when I'm saying this, I'm not only talking about the legislators. I'm talking about as a society, as a community. And Oregonians has always considered myself Oregonian, and Oregonians are fair-minded people, regardless of their background, where they come from, and where they live in the state. That's kind of the message. And again, increasing prosperity for all Oregonians, need more economic opportunities for Oregonians, making sure that we protect people's rights and rights and freedoms, and making Oregon safer and healthier. Those are the key elements that we're going to be focusing as a Democrats for 2025. And I think that those values, I do believe that will be shared by my colleagues on the Republican side also as well. With that said, thank you so very much for having us, and I'm looking forward to be engaged in dialogue with you all. Thank you.
Hi. I am, yeah. Hope springs eternal. It also gives me an excuse not to stand behind a podium. They're always as tall as I am. So I'm glad to have an excuse to not have to hang out behind the podium. I'm Christine Drazen. I am the House Republican leader, and thank you for having us here today. You know, yes, it is rainy and cold right now, but I bring good news. I hear the sun is returning. And so thank you again for having us here today. On behalf of the House Republican Caucus in particular, I would love to share our approach to this legislative session coming up. We really believe strongly that the status quo in our state is not working. The shared values that we have across the aisle and with all Oregonians, I think, are unwavering. We believe in the future of this state. We believe in a strong public education system. We believe in a strong economy. I believe that this state is one of the most extraordinary places in the nation and across the world. It's my home. I have 3 kids. I'm a multi-generation Oregonian. I love this place. And I believe that we have the opportunity to work across the aisle, and that we have a lot of values in common. And the vast majority of what happens in Salem is wholly bipartisan. But when it comes to these large issues that continue to plague us, we have spent $4.2 billion on housing within just a small number of years. The results have not yet achieved the intended goal. Our homeless numbers have exceeded 20,000 individuals living on our streets. We don't yet have the point in time count from this year, but from the most recent year, those numbers have gone in the last handful of years from 17,000 up to 20. And we continue to see those numbers rise. Now, what that tells me is a couple of things. And the first of which, that I think is the most important, is that we need to try something different. That it's not necessarily that money is being misdirected or it shouldn't be spent, but that it's not solving the intended problem. If our intention is to reduce the number of folks that we see out in the cold every single night, we're not getting that done. And if we're not getting that done with the strategies that we're using today, we need to continue to explore new strategies. The status quo, continuing to fund the status quo, continuing to do what we have done, and just adding more money to it isn't getting the job done. Our approach to homelessness has always been one where we recognize that